What is going on, YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review a collaboration EP by Cody Manson and Shaaby, and this project is basically called Fishscale. This came out in the spring of 2021, and this is kind of an interim project for Cody Manson in between like his Psychoactive album, which was his debut back in 2020, and then he also dropped an E equals MC Skelter album from 2022, which was his second album. But he dropped two EPs, I think basically on the same day in June of 2021. This was one of them. Then there was like the Charlie Monroe EP. So there were two EPs that kind of came out. The Charlie Monroe EP was more of like remixes and stuff, but this particular project is pretty much packed to the gills full of hits on here. I just would have to overall say I enjoyed this project quite a bit. It's definitely a good taste of kind of like leery and kind of more gloomy and just kind of distorted horrorcore in a lot of ways. And it's just interesting to kind of get some of this. I think this is the sort of stuff that you're going to hear at like the gathering of the Juggalos and that type stuff. And I would definitely have to say this is like a good burst of like new energy. And I definitely like for music nowadays, which is seeming to kind of be like centrally trap music, and especially in rap music, it's just kind of more of like a central trap kind of tune. I feel like the sheer amount of horrorcore, especially horrorcore that sounds like it can break even and has like a huge glossary of like kick-ass production in there, is just becoming harder to sift through. And there's just a lot of stuff that's happening. You've got boom bap coming back. You've got like trap music sprawling. You've got trap R&B. You've got stuff like you've got stuff like Drake and Party Next Door and that type stuff that just kind of go nuts, and Bryson Tiller and some of those folks. There's just a bunch of differential styles kind of going along. You got folks like Travis Scott, and just a bunch of type folks kind of going along with it. I think that Cody Manson's valve as far as some of this goes is pretty refreshing. I just would have to say I like the ornateness of this project, and it really sparkles when it comes to the production. I just would have to say this sort of emphasis on these kind of gloomy and kind of murky, dusky kind of beats on here is pretty crazy. Like a lot of this just really feels like ripped right out of like a B movie or something like that, something out of like some sort of horror freak show type stuff, something that you'd see at like some sort of like off hole in the wall kind of pub or something like that. I just really like the concept behind it. But I'm going to go ahead and talk about the single. So I'm not sure if there were singles. Cody Manson, the thing about Cody Manson is there's not a bunch of information about him really readily available. Like I tried to find like a biography about this guy, and there's not much apart from like a paragraph or two. Despite the fact that he has a couple albums out, there's just not an overabundance of information about him. But I would have to say I visited his YouTube, and it seems like he does at least have a music video for the song Purge, which I would just treat as like the single. So this one's a pretty crazy. This is probably the craziest song on here, at least in terms of the most up-tempo energy, and it has a real distorted kind of metal type sound towards it. So it's kind of a metal song, but it is rap on here, but it just really feels like a distorted metal kind of downtown kind of song. I just really like the overall craziness. It's a pretty rave song. It definitely has a pretty like solitary kind of ferocious bite on here that just has like a lot of pure high octane craziness in a lot of ways. I like the concept of it. But yeah, this is an EP, and for that matter, it's an underground EP, so it's just very off to the side. I'm not really sure if there's like a CD of this project, and if it's just a digital only download. I mean, really, this is pretty low key. This is definitely about low key as for the most part it would seem to get, especially considering that horrorcore is kind of like an afterthought in most of today's times anymore. But I would have to say, basically, to recommend the songs, I liked all five of the songs. I like Trife Life, Catch Up, Junkies, Flex Zone, and Purge. I'm just going to go ahead and talk about the other four songs. Like Trife Life has a pretty gloomy and ghoulish kind of piano beat on here. It's a dap song. I definitely see it as like a dap song, but this is definitely kind of a juggalo type tune. I would have to say this is definitely one of those gathering type tunes. I would definitely have to look after it and say it's very sullen and just kind of straightforward, but it just kind of has like that kind of rundown type feel of it, but just kind of has that given the rundown type feeling of it. It's just a dap kind of song and just an overall sullen and ghoulish kind of song. I feel like Ketchup is a real glaring and blurry kind of song. It just has a lot of bleary type feel towards it. It's definitely a club hit, but I kind of feel like it's just the overall glariness of it. It just really feels like a slurred kind of DUI inducing kind of song. Now, I don't recommend the DUIs, but definitely is a DUI inducing kind of song as of how bleary it kind of is. I feel like Purge is another one that is or I feel like Junkies is a really dizzy and I feel like Junkies is a really trippy and dizzy kind of song and just really feels zoned out. And this one's a little bit not quite as blurry and quite as creamy as like Ketchup is, but this Junkies one just feels a lot more of like a trippy kind of one. This is probably the smoking song out of the two, where I feel like Ketchup is the more get drunk kind of song, but Junkies is the kind of more smoking kind of one. They both just have like some pretty distorted kind of feels towards them, but I definitely like the concept of it. It's just kind of that these are both club cuts. I feel like basically the whole album is filled with that. I feel like Purge's metal energy, high octane metal energy is a nice club cut. That's probably the most central kind of get things started. I feel like the entry kind of dap tune would be Trife Life. I feel like the drinking song would be Ketchup and the smoking song would be Junkies, but all four of those are basically club cuts. And then Flex Zone is just kind of a pounding one. This is definitely one that is just kind of a pounding kind of bop, and this one just kind of has like, this would probably be one for the vehicle. This kind of has that thumping kind of, really you can hear it in the speakers, kind of thumping kind of pound bass type stuff in there. It's just real nice kind of uh yeah, this overall pounder. And this is definitely a pounding one for that sort of concept. I definitely like the thing about how that kind of works. But this whole production on this project really slaps. I just would have to say this has some kind of off the wall and different distorted kind of type beats on here that really give it some edge, and it definitely has a lot of electricity and distinction compared to some of the stuff that kind of goes around. And it's not to say that like today's beats as far as like 2021 2022 are bad, but I just look after it like some of these are really kind of murky and just kind of give off like some pretty kind of addled kind of sleazy kind of craze towards them that just has like a different kind of sense of what needs to happen that just isn't appreciated enough. And really, I mean, this EP is probably like $8, $7, something like that. I would like for it to be on CD because I would definitely like to knock this in the whip. But I don't know. It just seems like nowadays this is a reason behind why 2021, 2023 type stuff is not overly central on my mind, is just because it's kind of shifting to digital only and the mentalities are just starting to change more and more. But I do like this album. It's full of little gloomy and murky kind of tunes on here, even though it's only 5 songs. I just feel like it's an overall vicious highlight. So yeah, this EP is going to get a 10 out of 10. Cody Manson and Shaaby do a really great job. I would have liked probably a couple other extra tunes, but I'm going to have to check out some of Cody Manson's other stuff just to see if they hit as hard as this one did, because this is like a nice, haunting, kind of ghoulish burst of a shot in the arm of energy here. The social score is going to get like the social score I'm going to give a 10 out of 10 also, because these are just some murky gems. I feel like that sort of concept just really has like its containment about it, and that just really has some ones that kind of jump off the page here, and it just is an overall burst of festive energy and that type of stuff. Just very gloomy, dusky, murky, that type of stuff. It just really has that kind of kinetic edge towards it. But yeah, I just would have to say it's an overall gem. So if you can find it, I would definitely encourage like broadcasting about it, because this is pretty quality stuff here. In terms of the future, like Cody Manson has been gone since 2022. He might be working on stuff, but I know he at least dropped an album, the E equals MC Skelter, somewhere in like the spring or so of 2022. So we'll see what happens next. But this is definitely a jolt of energy that's worth not ignoring.